while we listen into that, we want to show you this. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing the UN General Assembly. Let's hear how he describes the plight of his country and what he wants the world to do.
Nuclear disarmament. Frankly, this is a good strategy, but it should not be the only strategy to protect the world from the final war. Ukraine gave up its third largest nuclear arsenal. The world then decided Russia should become a keeper of such power. Yet history shows it was Russia who deserved nuclear disarmament the most back in 1990s. And Russia deserves it now. Terrorists have no right to hold nuclear weapons. No right. But truly, not the nukes are the scariest now. While nukes remain in place, the mass destruction is gaining its momentum. The aggressor is weaponizing many other things, and those things are used not only against our country, but against all of yours as well. Fellow leaders, there are many conventions that restrict weapons, but there are no real restrictions on weaponization. First, let me give you an example. The food. Since the start of the full-scale war, the Ukrainian ports in the Black and Azov seas have been blocked by Russia. Until now, our ports on the Danube River remain the target for missiles and drones. And it is a clear Russia's attempt to weaponize the food shortage on the global market in exchange for recognition for some, if not all, of the captured territories. Russia is launching the food prices as weapons. The impact spans from the Atlantic coast of Africa to the Southeast Asia, and this is the threat scale. And I would like to thank those leaders who supported our Black Sea Grain Initiative and program Grain from Ukraine. Thank you so much. United, we made weapons turn back into food again. More than 45 nations saw how important it is to make Ukrainian food products available on the market, from Algeria to Spain to Indonesia and China. And even now, when Russia has undermined the Black Sea Grain Initiative, we are working to ensure food stability. And I hope that many of you will join us in these efforts. We launched a temporary sea export corridor from our ports, and we are working hard to preserve the land routes for grain exports. And it is alarming to see how some in Europe, some our friends in Europe, play out solidarity in political theater, making thriller from the grain. And they may seem to play their own role, but in fact, they are helping set the stage to a Moscow actor. Second, weaponization of energy. Many times the world has witnessed Russia using energy as a weapon. Kremlin weaponized oil and gas to weaken the leaders of other countries when they came to the Red Square. And now this threat is even greater. Russia is weaponizing nuclear energy. Not only it is spreading its unreliable nuclear power plant construction technologies, but it is also turning other countries' power plants into real dirty bombs. Look, please, what Russia did to our Zaporizhia power plant. Shelled it, occupied it, and now blackmails others with radiation leaks. Is there any sense to reduce nuclear weapons when Russia is weaponizing nuclear power plants? Scary question. The global security architecture offers no response or protection against such a treacherous radiation threat, and there is no accountability for radiation blackmailers so far. The short example is children. Children. Unfortunately, various terrorist groups abduct children to put pressure on their families and societies. But never before the mass kidnapping and deportation would become a part of the government policy. Not until now. We know the names of tens of thousands of children and have evidence on hundreds of thousands of others kidnapped by Russia in the occupied territories of Ukraine and later deported. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrant for Putin for this crime. And we are trying to get children back home. But time goes by. What will happen with them? What will happen to them? Those children in Russia are taught to hate Ukraine, and all ties with their families are broken. And this is clearly a genocide. When hatred is weaponized against one nation, it never stops there. Each decade, Russia starts a new war. Parts of Moldova and Georgia remain occupied. Russia turned Syria into ruins. And if not Russia, the chemical weapons would have never been used there in Syria. Russia has almost swallowed Belarus. It is obviously threatening Kazakhstan and other Baltic states. And the goal of the present war against Ukraine is to turn our land, our people, our lives, our resources into a weapon against you, against the international rules-based order. Many seats in the General Assembly Hall may become empty if Russia succeeds with its treachery and aggression. Ladies and gentlemen, the aggressor scatters deaths and brings ruins even without nukes, but the outcomes are alike. We see towns, we see villages in Ukraine wiped out by Russian artillery, leveled to the ground completely. We see the war of drones. We know the possible effects of spreading the war into the cyberspace. The artificial intelligence could be trained to combat well before it would learn to help the humanity. Thank God, people have not yet learned to use climate as a weapon. Even though humanity is failing on its climate policy objectives, this means that extreme weather will still impact the normal global life, and some evil state will also weaponize its outcomes. And when people in the streets of New York and other cities of the world went out on climate protest, we all have seen them. And when people in Morocco and Libya and other countries die as a result of natural disasters, and when islands and countries disappear underwater, and when tornadoes and deserts are spreading into new territories, and when all of this is happening, one unnatural disaster in Moscow decided to launch a big war and kill tens of thousands of people. We have to stop it. We must act united to defeat the aggressor and focus all our capabilities and energy on addressing these challenges. As nukes are restrained, likewise the aggressor must be restrained, and all its tools and methods of war. Each war now can become final, but it takes our unity to make sure that aggression will not break in again. And it is not a dialogue between the so-called great powers somewhere behind the closed doors that can guarantee us all the new wars era, but open war of all nations for peace. Last year, I presented the outlines of the Ukrainian peace formula at the UN General Assembly. Later, in Indonesia, I presented the full formula. And over the past year, the peace formula became the basis to update the existing security architecture. Now we can bring back to life the UN Charter and guarantee the full power for the rules-based world order. And tomorrow, I will present the details at a special meeting of the UN Security Council. The main thing is that it is not only about Ukraine. More than 140 states and international organizations have supported the Ukrainian peace formula fully or in part. The Ukrainian peace formula is becoming global. Its points offer solutions and steps that will stop all forms of weaponization that Russia used against Ukraine and other countries and may be used by other aggressors. Look, for the first time in modern history, we have a real chance to end the aggression on the terms of the nation which was attacked. And this is a real chance for every nation to ensure that aggression against your state, if it happens, God forbid, will end, not because your land will be divided and you will be forced to submit to military or political pressure, but because your territory and sovereignty will be fully restored. We launched the format of meetings between national security advisors and diplomatic representatives. Important talks and consultations were held in Hiroshima, in Copenhagen, and in Jeddah on the implementation of the peace formula. And we are preparing a global peace summit. And please, I invite all of you who do not tolerate any aggression to jointly prepare the summit. And I am aware of the attempts to make some shady dealings behind the scenes. Evil cannot be trusted. Ask Prigozhin if one bets on Putin's promises. Please, hear me. Let unity decide everything openly. While Russia is pushing the world to the final war, Ukraine is doing everything to ensure that after Russian aggression, no one in the world will dare to attack any nation. Weaponization must be restrained. War crimes must be punished. Deported people must come back home. And the occupier must return to their own land. We must be united to make it, and we'll do it. Slava Ukraini!
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Ukraine for the statement just made and request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Alejandro Giammattei.
All right, we've been listening there to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky make an impassioned address to the UN General Assembly, speaking out forcefully against Russia for its constant attacks on his country. And he notably made a point when it came to Ukrainian nuclear power plants and the threat that they are under. The Ukrainian president took particular issue with Russia's kidnapping of what he says are tens of thousands of children who were in the occupied territories. He said clearly what will happen to those children. Zelensky also called on the UN to take collective efforts against, quote, against the aggressor for the sake of all countries, and, quote, war crimes must be punished. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab was also listening in to that speech and joins us now from Kyiv with more. Imtiaz, what jumped out at you specifically? We've heard the Ukrainian president reference some of these topics before, but what jumped out to you and how he's framing them at the UNGA?
Hey, Errol, good to be with you. Pretty strong speech from the Ukrainian president, as expected. As we know, he's an incredible communicator, making that speech in English to the UN General Assembly, his first in-person speech to that assembly since Russia's invasion 19 months ago. And his message was clear that Russia is playing, in his words, a dirty game and putting the world at risk, evoking the nuclear threat that Ukraine now faces. Of course, throughout this conflict, Russia has dangled the threat of some sort of nuclear incident, for lack of a better phrase, and the threat is real. In the south of the country, in the Zaporizhzhia region, that nuclear power plant in occupied Russian territory has been repeatedly struck in missile attacks and in drone strikes, and the scientists there have had to take all 6 reactors offline and have periodically had to run supplies or security systems on diesel. That is how risky the nuclear situation here in Ukraine is, and that is something that Mr. Zelensky made very clear to point out, describing it in his words as the final war. And what he meant by that is that if Russia does go ahead and make good on some sort of nuclear threat, that it wouldn't just be the end of Ukraine, it would be the end of the world as we know it. On top of that, as you pointed out, he mentioned those Russian children who have been abducted by Ukraine since the start of this war, calling it a genocide. A genocide. Of course, we know that Vladimir Putin has been effectively fingered by the International Criminal Court with respect to these allegations of abductions. It's why he doesn't travel internationally, because depending on where he goes, he could be arrested. But again, going back to Mr. Zelensky's speech, it was a strong speech, it was a powerful speech, and it was a speech meant to unite the world behind Ukraine against Russia. And I think he should be feeling very good about how powerful that speech just was. Errol.
I can also detect Imtiaz's frustration because as he points to the global community really and saying that, grain exports, Russia has weaponized grain exports by limiting exports from the Black Sea, affecting some 45 nations. And he referred to that ICC, the International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Putin. There's not much else that can be done. He does have a meeting with the UN Security Council tomorrow. Russia has a permanent seat on that council. Talk to us about what he hopes to accomplish at the UN this week.
Look, this is a vital period for Mr. Zelensky. He is paying very close attention to his Western allies who have really delivered billions of dollars in military and other support to Ukraine, but he's also paying attention to the rest of the world. He wants to create a coalition around him that includes countries who still deal with Russia. These are African countries, these are some Asian countries, including China as well. And when you listen to his speech, and indeed, as you point out, some of his frustration is the fact that there isn't this uniform opposition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its occupation of Ukrainian territory, and the daily violence that it inflicts on this country, including several attacks just today, including in the Far East, or rather the Far West in Lviv. And so really what Mr. Zelensky will be doing over the next 48 hours or so is trying to meet with leaders face to face to say, our fight is your fight. Russia's aggression will one day be your aggression. You need to stand with us, you need to fight with us, and you need to support with us, because what's happening in Ukraine can happen elsewhere, has happened elsewhere, but the potential of something much greater happening around the world in terms of a ripple effect is much more pronounced if Russia is allowed to get away with what it's done in Ukraine, making it clear that there's no part of this calculus in his mind where any part of Ukraine is ceded to Russia, that Russia needs to withdraw back to its borders, including Crimea, which, as we know, it annexed in 2014. So as you rightly point out, Mr. Zelensky will be attending the Security Council. That is a 15-member body. Who's on that body? Russia. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, will be there. So it'll be very interesting to see how those two men interact with each other, if at all.
Yeah, Zelensky making an emotional, impassioned speech. His voice, sounding more raspy as the months go on. Is the world listening? Imtiaz Tyab joining us from Kyiv in Ukraine. Thank you very much.